this week's kick-ass episode of Parasyte the Maxim, Shinichi and Gotou have a battle in the forest that ends in a big bloody explosion. This week's episode also happens to have an environmental message, but at least it's not like Captain Planet. It's more like Resident Evil meets Street Fighter. Without a doubt, this was one of the best episodes of Parasyte the Maxim, which was a fantastic showcase for both Shinichi and Gotou, and it also saw the return of Migi in a really surprisingly epic scene for the series. But the thing that's really great about this one is the atmosphere behind all of it. It's really creepy. It's in the middle of the woods. It's dark. Gotou is transformed into a disgusting parasite monster, and he looks absolutely horrific. It really sets the tone for the entire episode, and Gotou himself is absolutely unstoppable. There are some scenes where he punches Shinichi across the forest, which literally looks like a scene out of Dragon Ball Z. I like it. It's also worth mentioning that the final form of Gotou has actually been seen in the intro since the beginning of the series, but this is the very first time that we've actually seen it in full, and I love the design. It's real creepy, a lot of exposed flesh tendrils all over the place, freaky nasty teeth, and 4 eyes. This guy is absolutely disturbing. Despite the fact that Gotou himself is nightmare fuel, Shinichi is able to defeat him when he tries to find the weakness in his armor. There's the scene where Shinichi ends up getting knocked through the forest and he falls into this big trash heap, and he finds this rusty old pipe, and he ends up stabbing Gotou right in the side. And he thought maybe this was going to be a great escape plan, but this is actually what sort of gives Shinichi the win. Because it's at this point that Gotou starts to lose control of his body, and all the other parasites start to try to escape because of all of the toxins which are now inside of him, including Migi, who makes a fantastic return where it looks like he's actually going to attack Shinichi, and then he actually meets his arm, there's this like big electrical discharge, and then he finally returns to him. And that's when Gotou constantly struggles with all the parasites trying to come out of his body. And I love the detail here, especially when you see one of the faces popping through, and then his back just starts to bubble up and explode with blood and pus all over the place. It's really freaking nasty, and then he finally goes on his final attack, and Migi is able to take him out with one slash, literally popping him like a balloon. This is where the episode gets interesting, because we have our big reunion between Migi and Shinichi, and Migi has gone through some big changes. First, he's a little more human than he was before, and he also seems to sort of regret actually killing Gotou. In fact, he doesn't even want to finish him off when he somehow is still trying to regenerate. Very slowly, mind you. This is also when Shinichi starts to believe that maybe the parasites were actually created to exterminate mankind for all of the wrongdoings that they've done to the planet. And this is where both him and Migi actually have this really interesting conversation about how they actually view the world, the evolution, and how the world actually has no emotions, at least according to Migi, and it really means nothing to him in general, yet all the beings that were born from this planet actually came from ooze. It gets a little heavy-handed here and there, but the scene is really great because basically Gotou's body is coming back together. You see this like disgusting bloody skeleton on the ground, and all these different parasite pieces are assimilating together and trying to come back. And Shinichi even feels a little regretful at this and decides not to kill him, and he decides to let the outcome be if he can actually regenerate or not. And it doesn't seem like it's going to be the case, so Shinichi decides to put him out of his misery and kill him right there, ending this week's absolutely ridiculous episode. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Parasyte the Maxim? You guys know I loved this episode. This was a full-on, big, badass, bloody action episode. Gotou versus Shinichi. It did not disappoint. I especially love how the first half of the episode, it's Shinichi without Migi, and he's still holding his own. I thought that was really awesome, that one scene where he picked up that one stick and literally bit it into a spear and tried to attack him by stabbing him in the back of the neck. That was beyond intense. But Gotou basically just ran a train over him in the first half of the episode, and in the second half, that's when Shinichi finally decided to take over, and things really got into his favor when he decided to stab him in the side. Although, obviously, Shinichi didn't plan for all of that to go down, it really helped out in his favor, and of course, it's nice symbolism to show that the things that humanity has done to the Earth to destroy it has actually ended up killing the parasites, and I especially love how Migi said, you know, this is why humans are the most dangerous after all. Even though parasites are really monstrous looking and have all these tentacles with blades, mankind will probably destroy themselves eventually. It's a very disturbing thought, but it's definitely one of the things that I think they're going for in the final part of this series. Something that is interesting is that Gotou, who is seemingly the main antagonist of Parasyte, was killed off in this week's episode. His story is done, and we got one episode left, and there is only one other villain I can think of in the series who is still existing, and that is Origami the Serial Killer. And who would have thought in the series of Parasyte that the final antagonist or threat of the series could actually just be a random normal human serial killer? I think they did that purposefully. It's actually really, really smart when you think about it, because, you know, humans are basically just as monstrous as the parasites. It's a really nice allegory. I think it's handled really well. On the technical side of things, this week's episode looked great. There were a ton of awesome moments. The artwork in particular. Every single close-up shot of Gotou's face looks so freaking badass and scary and awesome, and a lot of the action scenes really showcased some great moments. A lot of hand-to-hand combat, tendrils, and of course that big back explosion looked really nasty and painful, and then of course when he was killed as the sun rose, that was pretty freaking kick-ass. What I think I really loved about this episode too is that it sort of took me back to the old days of anime. It felt like I was watching like an old 80s like anime movie that you would rent at like Blockbuster or something, and that does make sense. This is based on an old manga series that started in the 80s and ran into the 90s, and I'm really glad to see that it's actually been following the manga series. I just started reading the manga last week knowing that we're actually getting close to the end because I just want to see how that holds up to it. And I love both of them so far, but I want to see the rest of the anime before I read the rest of the manga. So this was an awesome episode of Parasyte the Maxim that is definitely worth your time. Whether you're a fan of the manga version or you've been following the anime version, you gotta check out this week's episode. It was just pure anime badassery. I'm giving this week's episode a 5 out of 5. I got no complaints with it. It was just a fantastic episode all around. And stay tuned, because next week is the final episode of Parasyte the Maxim, and I am really excited. Thank you guys for watching my review. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and before you leave, please tell me what you thought about this week's episode of Parasyte the Maxim. What did you think of the battle between Shinichi and Gotou? And what do you want to see from the final episode of the series? Do you think Origami is going to return? Do you want an explanation for the parasites? Were they from Earth? Are they aliens? What's the deal with that? Remember, if you guys have not subscribed to our channel, you can do that by clicking on the channel icon right up cha, or possibly it's down cha. I don't know, YouTube's been making a lot of weird changes lately, and you can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Thank you guys again for watching, and stay dandy, baby.